In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful. Introduction. For several reasons, some positive and many negative, Sufism is currently attracting considerable interest both in the West and among non-traditional generations within the Islamic world itself. The collapse of more or less homogeneous systems of values in the modern world, uncertainty about the future, the widespread misunderstanding of religion in the West, particularly within the Christian world, whose teachings have become increasingly inaccessible, the desire for a liberating spiritual vision in a world undergoing progressive decline, and many other factors are driving the search for the spiritual teachings of the Eastern religions. In the West, this quest began a generation ago with a widespread interest in Hinduism and Buddhism. However, since much of what was written and even practiced at the time was either distorted or, at best, superficial, the attention devoted to these traditions, and more specifically to the study of Vedanta and Zen, soon developed into a passing fad that, for a generation eager for ever new experiences but unwilling or unable to explore any of them in depth, quickly became tiresome. Today, the interest of many has shifted towards Sufism, which likewise seems, unfortunately, destined to be altered and mutilated, either by those who act in good faith but are ignorant of the true nature of a spiritual path, or by those who are deliberately determined to reduce the most sublime truths to their own limited understanding. At the same time, however, alongside this interest driven by passing fashion, a deeper and more authentic attraction to Sufism can also be observed, both among those who sincerely wish to understand it for the benefit of their spiritual life, regardless of the religion or spiritual path they follow, and among those who seek an authentic spiritual path and are willing to make the necessary sacrifices to follow it. Among Western scholars of Islam, there is also a growing recognition of the central role that Sufism has played throughout Islamic history. Today, many acknowledge both the Islamic origins of Sufism and its inseparable connection with Islam, abandoning the older tendency to regard it as the result of foreign influences introduced into the Muslim religion. It is now impossible to write about Islamic spirituality without taking Sufism into account, although some Orientalists continue to maintain the older view. Whether it arises from genuine spiritual interest, from the pseudo-spirituality so prevalent in the contemporary West, or from academic research in the field of Islamic studies, it is evident that Western interest in the doctrines and true meaning of Sufism continues to grow. Yet works in Western languages capable of satisfying this interest remain relatively scarce, even as the need for them becomes increasingly apparent. Such a situation calls for every possible effort to prevent the distortion of Sufi teachings and, instead, to present them with the greatest fidelity to their authentic expression and in all their dimensions. Sufi wisdom embraces virtually every aspect of the spiritual life and constitutes one of the most complete and best preserved metaphysical and esoteric traditions to have survived into the modern age. During the 13th century AH, 19th century CE, the Islamic world suffered the consequences of Western influence while simultaneously witnessing the rise of rigorous, rationalist, and anti-mystical indigenous movements. An opposition to Sufism emerged, blaming it for nearly everything that modernists criticized in the Islamic world at the time, as well as for the domination exercised by the European powers. As a consequence, an entire generation of westernized Muslims, and many can still be found in various Islamic countries today, came to regard the very study of Sufism as a kind of colonialist conspiracy. Supported by the works of certain Orientalists, this movement sought to promote an Islam stripped of the spiritual and metaphysical dimensions of its teachings, reducing it to the narrowest interpretation of the divine law. Thus, the Islamic world was left intellectually defenseless against the assault of the modern West. The positive role played by Sufism throughout Islamic history, both politically and artistically, has consequently been underestimated and minimized. It is particularly noteworthy that Western studies of modern Islamic history have also ignored the major renewal movements that arose within Sufism during the 19th century, despite their influence being as significant as that of the westernized modernist movements that European historiography has traditionally emphasized. With the exception of the Sanasiya order, virtually nothing has been written about the immense importance of Sufi renewal movements such as the Darqawiyya and the Tijaniya in North Africa, the Ashriya in East Africa and the Arab Middle East, the Nimitaliya in Persia and southern India, or the Chishtiya and Qadariya orders in the Indo-Pakistani subcontinent. This silence served to diminish the importance of Sufism in the eyes of the educated Muslim classes, who were so often dependent on Western sources for the study of their own history. The rediscovery of Sufism in the Islamic world. Thus, until shortly after the Second World War, two types of students could be distinguished in the universities of the most modernized Islamic countries. On the one hand were those who had become completely secularized and westernized, rejecting Islam at least as a code and way of life. On the other hand were strictly observant Muslims who nevertheless reduced Islam to the most superficial interpretation of the Sharia, rejecting everything related to Sufism, that is, the intellectual and spiritual dimension of Islam. Although these two groups held opposing positions on almost every issue, they agreed in their opposition to Sufism. Today, while these two attitudes persist among students and the educated classes in many Muslim countries, a renewed and growing interest in Sufism and in the intellectual dimension of Islam can also be observed. The collapse of Western cultural values, the disillusionment brought about by modernism, the recognition of the tragedies caused by modern civilization and the anticipation of those yet to come, together with the realization that the West's intellectual challenge to Islam can be met only by following the guidance provided by Sufi teachings, have all contributed to this change in attitude. Compared with the previous generation, the number of young people drawn to Sufi orders and to the study of Sufism has increased considerably in countries as diverse as Egypt, Syria, and Persia. This interest is especially strong in the Indo-Pakistani subcontinent, where it has never declined, unlike in the Arab world and Turkey. In Turkey, interest among university students in Sufi writings has grown steadily since the period following the Turkish Revolution. The need for authentic exposition. Strange as it may seem, even within the Islamic world there are few authentic introductory works on Sufism adapted to readers who have received a modern, non-traditional education. From the standpoint of attitudes toward Sufism, and indeed toward Islam itself, three groups may be distinguished. A traditionalist majority, whose intellectual elite consists of the ulama, Sufi masters, and advanced disciples capable of understanding the traditional expositions of Islamic doctrine, both with regard to the Sharia and to Sufism. A westernized minority, which to this day has shown only a very limited interest in Sufism. And finally, a new minority educated according to modern methods, whose interest in the intellectual and spiritual heritage of Islam continues to grow. Each year a considerable number of Sufi texts are published, primarily in Arabic and Persian, but also in Turkish, Urdu, Bengali, and other languages of the Muslim world. However, apart from the poetry of authors such as Ibn al-Farid, Jalal al-Din Rumi, and Hafiz, which can be appreciated by any sensitive reader, the doctrinal works containing the intellectual teachings of Sufism are addressed only to a qualified minority and can be fully understood only by an intellectual elite belonging to the traditional classes. One may well ask how many Arabs, Turks, or Persians educated according to modern models are capable of understanding works such as the Fusus al-Hikam, the Bezels of Wisdom, by Ibn Arabi, the Manakib al-Arifin, the Virtues of the Gnostics, by al-Aflaki, or the Shar-i-Gulshan-i Raz, Commentary on the Garden of Mystery, by Lahiji, all of which have been published in recent years in Egypt, Turkey, and Persia, respectively. The challenge of modern ideologies. As the torrent of various isms, evolutionism, Marxism, socialism, and others, pours from the West into the lands of Islam, how can the educated Muslim classes draw upon the immense heritage of Islamic metaphysics, philosophy, and Sufism to protect themselves from this flood and avoid being swept away by it? Few have contact with the living masters from whom Sufis receive spiritual nourishment. Most remain confused and have access only to a handful of books written by contemporary scholars in their own countries, who generally do little more than imitate Western Orientalists. The truly reliable contemporary expositions and profound interpretations of Sufism written in the languages of the Muslim world can probably be counted on one hand. Consequently, this renewed interest in Sufism among the educated classes finds very few works capable of satisfying it. The role of European languages. Furthermore, many Muslims are currently studying in the West and, paradoxically, handle French or English more easily than their own native languages when discussing intellectual subjects. Even in some Muslim countries, such as Malaysia, Pakistan, Nigeria, and the Muslim regions of North Africa, intellectual discourse is often conducted more in French or English than in Malay, Urdu, Bengali, Arabic, or the local African languages. In such cases, the dissemination of Sufism in European languages may better respond to the growing desire for knowledge in this field. Thus, the paths of two worlds, the Muslim and the Western, appear to converge upon the same need: authentic studies of Sufism. For many different reasons, interest in Sufism continues to grow steadily, both among Muslim intellectuals and among a significant number of highly educated young Westerners. For some, it is merely a matter of curiosity; for others, it answers the profound needs of a spirit seeking to escape the superficiality of the modern world. Yet, studies capable of authentically conveying the truths of Sufism remain extremely rare. As a result, even those motivated by the best intentions are often led, through the reading of unreliable works, into infernal depths rather than the celestial heights they had hoped to attain. Western studies on Sufism. Today, the scholarly works of Western Orientalists on Sufism may be divided into three categories. The first consists of critical studies burdened by numerous prejudices. The second includes competent and often deeply perceptive works, such as those of Louis Massignon, Henry Corbin, Émile Durmangam, Louis Gardet, Cyril Rice, Fritz Meyer, and Pio Filippani Ranconi, scholars who, in some cases, actually participated in the world of Sufism. The third category consists of the outstanding translations produced by specialists such as Sylvestre de Sacy, Reynold Nicholson, and Arthur J. Arbery. There are also works that claim affiliation with various Sufi movements established in the West. These often contain authentic teachings inherited from the founders of those movements, but mixed with extraneous material, making it difficult, especially for the beginner, to separate the wheat from the chaff. In recent times, many of these works have assumed an occultist character and have virtually nothing to do with Islam. The same may be said of certain circles that have emerged in Western Europe, particularly in England. Finally, there are authentic expositions of Sufism, such as those of René Guénon, Martin Lings, Jean-Louis Michan, Leo Skaya, and, above all, Frithjof Schuon and Titus Burckhardt. Although few in number, these works are indispensable for anyone who wishes to gain a genuine understanding of Sufism. The need for authentic works on Sufism. Therefore, it is essential to increase both the number and quality of reliable works on Sufism, in order to offer a wider range of research tools capable of responding to the diverse needs of scholars and of allowing at least an initial access to the vast field of traditional Sufi teachings. To achieve this goal, it is necessary to consider both the Western public, who would naturally benefit most from exposition in a European language, and the Muslim educated in a Western-style system, for whom a European language is, in many cases, the primary vehicle of knowledge. The modest essays gathered in this volume have been conceived precisely with both types of readers in mind, with the hope of making a small contribution to the body of studies on Sufism, since they are based on an authentically Sufi point of view. The exterior and the interior. In the Holy Quran, God speaks of himself as the outer or manifest, al-Zahir, and as the inner or hidden, al-Batin. Since this world is the sum of the reflections and theophanies of the divine names and qualities, all realities that appear within it likewise possess both an external aspect and an internal aspect. The outward appearance of things is not a mere illusion; it possesses, on its own level, a certain degree of reality. However, it implies a movement of separation and distancing from the principle that resides at the center and that can be identified with the inner. To live in the external world already means to participate in existence, to be something rather than nothingness. But to be content with the external alone is to betray the very nature of man, whose deepest purpose consists precisely in moving from the outside to the inside, from the periphery of the circle of existence to the transcendent center, and thereby returning creation to its origin. Sufism provides the means to achieve this supreme goal. God has made possible, through revelation, the path that leads from exteriority to interiority, and revelation includes both an outward and an inward dimension. In Islam, this inner or esoteric dimension of revelation largely corresponds to Sufism, although in the Shura context Islamic esotericism has also taken other forms. Furthermore, from an Islamic perspective, something equivalent to Sufism must necessarily exist within every revelation or integral tradition. This is why, in Islamic languages, one frequently speaks of the Sufism of this or that tradition, since, from the Islamic point of view, tasawwuf, like religion, or al-Islam in its universal sense, is simultaneously perennial and universal. But this does not in any way mean that Sufism can be practiced outside the Islamic religious structure. If we understand al-Islam as religion in its universal sense, then the type of esotericism, or tasawwuf, according to Sufi terminology, that is practiced must belong to the specific religion from which it arises. And if we understand al-Islam only as the religion revealed through the Holy Quran, then the tasawwuf that can be legitimately practiced is only that which is rooted in the Quranic revelation and which we call, par excellence, Sufism. In any case, a valid esoteric path is inseparable from the objective structure of the revelation to which it belongs. Buddhist esotericism cannot be practiced within an Islamic framework, nor can Islamic esotericism exist within a Buddhist framework. Likewise, one cannot claim to practice a form of esotericism that ignores the exoteric teachings of the religion and remains suspended in a void, just as one cannot plant a tree with its roots in the air. It is only possible to undertake the journey toward God as part of the sacred community, Ummah, or of the mystical body, if one prefers Christian terminology, that God has formed and sanctified through a revelation transmitted to humanity by His will. The Islamic teaching that all those who enter paradise do so as members of the Ummah expresses this same truth. The nature of the Sufi path. Following Sufism means gradually dying to the individual ego in order to become the true self. It means being reborn through the realization of that which has always existed from eternity, although without being known until the necessary transformation has taken place. It means shedding one's own form, freeing oneself from it as the snake sheds its skin. Such a transformation implies a profound change in the very substance of the soul, produced by the effect of the divine presence, Hudur, which is established in the heart through initiation conferred by the spiritual master and acts through grace, baraka, flowing from the source of revelation. For this transformation to take place, several fundamental elements are required. A connection with the origin or spiritual chain, silsila. A discipline or method intended to educate the soul. A teacher capable of applying this method and guiding, irshad, the disciple through the various stages of his spiritual journey, ser wa suluk. A doctrine concerning the nature of things that guides the disciple along that path. And finally, a formal initiation, bay'ah, that links the disciple to the master, to the spiritual chain, and to higher orders of reality. These are the fundamental aspects of Sufism. The content of Sufi doctrine. To fully explain the teachings of Sufism, it would be necessary to present at least a summary of Sufi doctrine that includes metaphysics. The study of the principles and ultimate nature of reality. Cosmology. The study of the structure of the universe and the multiple states of being. Traditional psychology. A knowledge of the soul inseparable from one of the most profound forms of psychotherapy that has ever existed. Eschatology. The science concerning the ultimate destiny of human beings and the universe, as well as the post-mortem states of existence. The exposition of Sufi teachings should also include an explanation of spiritual methods, their concrete application, and the way they take root in the very substance of the disciple's soul. This would also require addressing the relationship between master and disciple and the spiritual virtues generated in the soul of the latter through an authentic alchemical operation performed by the master. Beyond Sufi poetry, which often expresses different states through images, awal, and spiritual attitudes of the soul in its search for the divine, almost all Sufi treatises deal precisely with these issues. Some are predominantly doctrinal, others are more practical. Some are descriptive and aim to offer a model for imitation rather than direct instruction. The immense Sufi literature, especially in Arabic and Persian, but also in Turkish, Urdu, Bengali, Sindhi, and many other Muslim languages, is like a vast ocean whose waves move in multiple directions and diverse forms, yet always return to the pure and simple element from which they emerged. This vast literature remains ever present and relevant because it is inspired. The masters of Sufism have said essentially the same thing throughout the ages, and yet their expressions are always different. Their teachings constitute new creations adapted to the diverse individuals to whom they are addressed, and are based on a renewed vision of spiritual reality as it is directly contemplated by their authors. They are like the dawn. Although each day resembles the previous one, every sunrise is new and brings new perceptions. Authentically Sufi writings represent, on the one hand, the horizontal continuity of knowledge transmitted from generation to generation back to the origins of Islam, and, on the other hand, a vertical and ever-renewed vision of truth, directly connected to the origin of revelation and to the center of our own being here and now. Sufism and Islamic civilization. Just as breathing animates the body, Sufism has infused its spirit into the entire structure of Islam, both in its social and intellectual manifestations. Sufi orders, as organized bodies within Islamic society, have exerted a profound and lasting influence on its social structure. However, their primary function has been to safeguard spiritual disciplines through time and ensure their transmission from one generation to the next. These were linked to various secondary initiatic organizations, ranging from orders of chivalry, responsible for the defense of the frontiers of Islam, to guilds of artisans and professional associations. Among them were the groups known as Ghazis and Javanmards, the latter still associated in Persia with the futuwa or traditional houses of physical and spiritual training. Also, the trade guilds grouped under the ideal of futuwa traced their spiritual origin to Ali ibn Abi Talib, the cousin and son-in-law of the Prophet. It is impossible to fully understand Islamic society without taking into account the role of these societies within society, especially during periods when the external social structure weakened, as occurred during the Mongol invasions in the eastern regions of the Islamic world. Nor is it possible to understand many aspects of Islamic history, such as the expansion of Islam in Asia or the transformation of Persia from a predominantly Sunni country into a predominantly Shi'a nation, without recognizing the decisive role played by Sufism. Sufism and education. The influence of Sufism in the educational field has been equally profound. The essential purpose of Sufism is the integral education of the human being, until he achieves the full realization of all his possibilities. The direct participation of numerous Sufis in the founding of universities and madrasas, as happened with the famous Seljuk vizier Nizam al-Mulk, clearly demonstrates this influence. Similarly, Sufi centers, known as Zawiya in Arabic and Kanika in Persian, played a fundamental role in the spread of teaching. During certain historical periods, such as those following the Mongol invasions, the traditional educational system was destroyed in some regions of the Islamic world. In such circumstances, Sufi centers remained the sole repositories of both spiritual instruction and academic knowledge. Thanks to them, it was later possible to rebuild traditional educational institutions. Sufism, the sciences, and the arts. The influence of Sufism on the sciences and the arts has been immense. As the author has shown in other works, within Islam the Sufi tradition is closely linked to the development of the sciences, including the natural sciences. In almost all art forms, from poetry to architecture, the affinity with Sufism is clearly evident. Even in this life, the Sufis symbolically dwell at the gateway of paradise and breathe an atmosphere of spiritual splendor whose beauty is reflected in everything they say and do. For Islam, God Himself is beauty. And for Sufism, which constitutes the heart of Islam and contains its innermost essence, this truth is manifested with even greater intensity. It is no coincidence that the writings of Sufi masters, whether in prose or verse, are among the most elevated and beautiful works of Islamic literature. Sufi literature. In the literary field, much of the most universal work produced by Islamic civilization belongs to Sufism. It was the Sufi spirit that elevated Arabic and Persian literature from local or purely epic forms to the heights of a didactic and mystical literature of universal scope. Thanks to it, the Arabic language achieved extraordinary richness in prose, while Persian fully developed its poetic potential. Likewise, many regional languages of the Islamic world reached their highest expression thanks to Sufi writers. The true literary genius of Sindhi, for example, seems to have been concentrated almost entirely in the figure of the great Sufi poet Shah Abdul Latif. Many languages owe their development and continued use as vehicles of Islamic culture precisely to the work of Sufi poets. Music, architecture, and traditional arts. A similar situation can be observed in music, architecture, calligraphy, miniature painting, and other traditional arts. Many of the great Muslim architects were linked to Sufism through guilds of builders and artisans. Numerous masters of calligraphy and miniature painting belong directly to Sufi orders. As for music, within Islam it acquires full legitimacy only in the form of the spiritual concert, sama, practiced in the Sufi context. For this reason, the great Arabic, Persian, and Turkish musical traditions were cultivated for centuries primarily by individuals associated with Sufism. Since the time of Amir Khusro, many of the great masters of classical music in northern India have been Muslim, and this situation continues to the present day. Certain fundamental developments in Indian music are directly linked to Sufi practice and theory, and many of its principal masters have been associated, in one way or another, with the Sufi orders of the subcontinent. The Sufis are the people of wisdom and inner vision, doc. It is no coincidence that this same term also means in Arabic and Persian, both taste and artistic sensibility. If the Sufis have cultivated the arts, it has not been because these constitute an end in themselves within the spiritual path, but because following Sufism means becoming increasingly aware of the divine beauty manifested in all things. In the light of that beauty, the Sufi creates works that reflect, according to the rules of traditional art and in accordance with the nobility of his own nature, the beauty of the supreme artisan. Purpose of this work. In order to illustrate all aspects of Sufism in clear and correct language, a deeply felt need in both East and West, it would be necessary to address not only the various aspects of Sufism mentioned above, but also all its principal manifestations within Islamic civilization. Such an undertaking would constitute a monumental work, requiring the collaboration of numerous qualified scholars. Some existing traditional texts have already laid the necessary foundations for revealing the fundamental doctrines and essential teachings of Sufism. However, much remains to be done to illuminate Sufism not only in its essence but also in its historical manifestations and practical applications, so that people of diverse inclinations and temperaments may benefit spiritually from this vast ocean of grace. This volume aims to be a modest contribution to the literature on Sufism, as it addresses several important themes for its understanding. It does not, however, attempt to offer even a brief systematic exposition of all its aspects. The first part of the book studies the main aspects of Sufism. The second part examines certain problems relating to Islamic history and Sufism. In the third part, 3 essays are devoted to major contemporary problems facing the modern world in general and the Muslim world in particular, problems whose solution may be sought through the interpretation and application of the universal principles implicit in Sufism. The essays collected in this book, with the exception of chapters 5 and 9, originally appeared over the past 10 years in the following publications. Milla wa Milla, Melbourne. The Journal of the Regional Cultural Institute, Tehran. Iran, London. Studies in Comparative Religion, London. Religious Studies, Cambridge. The Islamic Quarterly, London. All of them have been revised and, in some cases, expanded. The author expresses his gratitude to William Chittick for his assistance in preparing the manuscript, and to Miss Parvin Pirwani, who typed it. The author's hope is that these modest studies will provide some keys capable of unlocking certain doors of the Sufi treasury and will encourage others to undertake rigorous research in a field that can yield abundant fruits, both spiritual and intellectual, for those animated by sincere intention. There is no success except through God. Tehran, 1970. Chapter 1. Sufism and the Perennial Nature of the Mystical Quest. Truly, we created man in the most beautiful of forms, asani taqwim, then we reduced him to the lowest of the low, asfala saflan. Quran 95:4, 5. Do not think that when you disappear the world will also disappear, 1,000 lamps may be extinguished, but the circle of the Sufis will remain. The Quranic verse cited above defines, with permanent and universal validity, the position of man in this world. Man was created in the most beautiful of forms, but subsequently fell into an earthly condition of separation and estrangement from his divine prototype, into that state which the Quran calls the lowest of the low. Since the situation described in this verse concerns the innermost nature of man, it constitutes a permanent reality that he carries within himself. No supposed evolution and no historical change can destroy either the divine image that is the origin of man or the condition of separation that is the cause of his suffering and misery. Man thus carries within himself both the image of perfection and the experiential certainty of separation. These two elements coexist as permanent aspects of the human condition, beyond all historical change or transformation. Regarding the Quranic term asani taqwim, Kamal al-Din Kashani, a 15th-century Sufi commentator, writes that it means that God created man as the most complete and perfect theophany, as the most universal and comprehensive stage of divine manifestation, so that he might become the bearer of the divine trust, amana, and the source of unlimited effusion. He also interprets asfala saflan as the world of natural passions and spiritual dispersion. It follows that man bears the imprint of the divine form, that is, he possesses a theomorphic nature, as stated in the Hadith, God created man in his own image. Kalaka Allah Adam Allah Suratahai. At the same time, he has fallen from that original perfection which he can never entirely forget. The greatness of the human condition, with its immense possibilities, its dangers, and its constant search for the divine, is inscribed in the deepest fibers of human existence. If man were only of the highest stature, remaining in a paradisiacal state of proximity to the divine and of identity with his celestial archetype, there would be no mystical quest in the ordinary sense of the term. Union would already have been achieved, the goal of spiritual life would already have been reached. Similarly, if man were merely a creature of the sensible world, subject only to passion and confined to his natural and physical inclinations, if he were definitively bound to the state of asphalos saphlon, there would likewise be no possibility of mystical seeking. Man would not feel dissatisfaction with the finite world, nor would he continue searching, often blindly, for that infinite reality capable of freeing him from the limits of the finite and the relative. He would be content as an earthly creature. Transcendence would have no meaning for him. He would remain limited like other creatures of the earth, and like them he would not even be aware of his limitations or of his confinement within space and time. But precisely because these two elements, the theomorphic nature of man and the earthly covering that conceals it, coexist within human nature, man lives in this world while being driven by his own essence to transcend it. Religion, the mystical quest, and human nature. Religion in general, and the mystical quest in particular, are as permanent as human existence itself, because man cannot remain truly human without seeking the infinite and without feeling the need to transcend himself. To be human means precisely to seek to transcend mere humanity. It follows that being satisfied with a purely human condition amounts to falling into a subhuman state. The history of Western man during the last 5 centuries amply demonstrates the validity of this statement. The mystical quest is perennial because it is rooted in the very nature of things, and a human society is healthy to the extent that this quest is recognized as a fundamental element of communal life. When a community or society ceases to recognize this deep longing, and when the number of those who follow the vocation of the mystical path diminishes, the society itself eventually collapses under the weight of its own structure or is destroyed by psychological illnesses it can no longer cure, having denied itself the only spiritual nourishment capable of sustaining the soul. Some individuals will continue to seek and follow the mystical path, but the society to which they belong will no longer be able to benefit fully from the illuminating presence of those who, by seeking the superhuman, allow others to remain at least at the human level and provide society with the only true criteria for judging its worth. Even in the darkest periods of spiritual eclipse, there are always individuals endowed with a contemplative and spiritual nature. This is because the balance of the human community depends upon their existence, that a society entirely devoid of contemplative human beings would simply cease to exist. All earthly existence proceeds from being, the luminous source of all that is, and ultimately being and knowing are one and the same. If the light radiated by contemplative man upon his surroundings were extinguished, the very bond between being and its earthly manifestations would dissolve, and beings would be deprived of their conscious ontological connection with their origin. They would fall into the abyss of nothingness. The tradition that the world will not end as long as there are people on earth who invoke the name of God refers precisely to this truth, since invocation of the divine name constitutes, in Sufism, the principal means of spiritual realization. Furthermore, if contemplative man did not exist in this world, creation itself would no longer have a reason to exist, for the purpose of creation is for the divine to come to know itself through manifestation, a reality synthesized in the heart of the monastic, al-arif billah. Therefore it is said in Islam, the earth will never be devoid of God's proof. La taqlu al-ard min hajat Allah. The search for the infinite is the only thing that gives meaning to the finite world in which man finds himself. The imprint of perfection that man carries within himself makes all limited existence bearable, but only insofar as it can lead him toward the infinite and the absolute. Hence the perennial nature of the mystical quest and the effort of men of all ages to see beyond the finite, since infinite reality determines and encompasses all things. The cosmos as a sign of the infinite. The cosmos itself continually reveals to man the eternal message of truth. Its finite forms manifest the signs of infinity. As Ali said, I marvel at the man who, contemplating the universe created by God, doubts his existence. But to achieve this awareness, man needs revelation, which, like the cosmos, comes from the infinite and the absolute, though in a more direct manner. Revelation therefore provides the key to unlocking both the mysteries of human existence and the mysteries of the universe. Revelation is a gift descending from divine mercy, al-Rahmah, allowing man to move from the finite to the infinite. Having fallen from the state of the highest stature to that of the lowest of the low, man can recover his primordial state only through the grace of heaven. Only through the beatific vision is he able to contemplate the cosmos as a reflection of the spiritual world mirrored in the material and temporal order. For one whose soul attains the beatific vision, the universe is the book of supreme truth. Accidents are its vowels, substance its consonants, and the degrees of being its verses and pauses. Mahmud Shabastari. The saving grace of revelation and the mystical path. The saving grace of revelation is the only thing that makes possible the passage of the soul from the outer world to the inner world, from the periphery to the center, from form to meaning. And this path is precisely identified with the mystical quest. Due to the intimate relationship between the soul and the cosmos, this journey constitutes both a penetration into the center of the soul and a migration toward the dwelling beyond the cosmos. And in both places, which are in reality one and the same, resides the divine presence, which is at once our deepest being and something entirely other than ourselves. As a Sufi master of the last century wrote, "The soul is something immense, it is the entire cosmos gathered together, even if it is only a copy of it. Everything that exists in the cosmos can be found in the soul, and everything that is in the soul is also found in the cosmos. Therefore, he who masters his soul is certainly lord of the cosmos, while he who is mastered by his soul is mastered by the entire cosmos. And only by the grace of the heavenly message, whatever form it may take in the various religions of humanity, does the soul become capable of freeing itself from the stain of limitation and imperfection, of seeking the infinite, and of fulfilling the task for which it was created." Quoting Omar Khayyam. "O soul, when you are purified from earthly stain, you will ascend to heaven as a free spirit. Your dwelling place is the Empyrean. Shame on you if you choose to dwell in this mud house. He created me out of eternal love, and first taught me the law of charity. Then he placed in my heart a key capable of unlocking the treasure of reality. I would seek your face in a humble tavern rather than pray without you turned toward the mihrab. O first and last of all things! Do with me what you will, burn me in hell or save me by your grace." However, the saving grace of revelation has never failed. To be human means to have before oneself the path that leads from the relative to the absolute. It also means to be capable of traversing the mystical path. As Rumi says, "The moment you were cast into this lower world, the staircase appeared by which you may ascend." The transparency of the cosmos and its function as a ladder toward a metacosmic reality can only be recognized when the grace of revelation operates effectively and when, through it, the soul is enabled to penetrate its own center and identify with it. And this possibility is always present, even if it is not realized by all human beings. Both revelation and the cosmos, this latter by virtue of the former, can lead man toward that infinity whose joy and beatitude many seek in vain in the shadows of the finite world. Finite form and infinite content. Revelation, in its outward form, is limited. Precisely because it is outwardly finite, it appears to men in its rites, doctrines, and symbols as just one more among the many sets of finite forms in this world. But unlike all other forms, religious and revealed forms open inwardly onto the infinite, because they proceed from a superformal center that contains all forms while remaining above them. The reason for the permanence of traditional forms and symbols is precisely this: although outwardly subject to time and space, their inner content leads to the infinite. Thus they reflect, even within the transient world of time and space, the permanence belonging to the spiritual world. And this is why they satisfy man's perennial need to transcend the finite and to reach, beyond the fleeting, that which endures. The traditional cosmos and the modern cosmos. As for the cosmos, traditional cosmologies, Islamic, Christian, and even those of certain Hindu and Buddhist schools, to mention only the best known, represented it as finite in its outward form. However, these same cosmologies, like revelation and the traditions to which they were intimately linked, were infinite in their symbolic content. The traditional cosmos was linked to space, its limits were almost perceived and indeed visible. When traditional man contemplated the stars, he saw in the sphere of the fixed stars the limit of the universe. Beyond that heaven there was neither space nor matter, la jala wa la mala, as Islamic philosophers would say, but only the divine presence. This finite cosmos was far from being a prison without escape. On the contrary, precisely because of its limited form, it functioned as an icon to be contemplated and transcended. Thanks to its symbolism, the concentric spheres regarded as a powerful image of the states man must pass through to reach being, the content of this cosmos was infinite. Its limited forms were analogous to the forms of religion, which lead man toward an unlimited inner reality. Modern science, after Giordano Bruno, destroyed the limits of the cosmos and with them the very notion of cosmos, a word that literally means order. The universe became outwardly limitless. But precisely because of the absence of a metaphysics or theology of nature, the symbolic meaning of this new vision of the universe was generally lost in the West. Moreover, since modern science neglects symbolic meaning, the content of this outwardly infinite universe remains in fact finite, restricted to the level of purely material existence. In a sense, the situation has been reversed in comparison with traditional sciences. In those, the cosmos was outwardly finite but inwardly open to the infinite. In modern science, the universe is outwardly infinite but inwardly finite. On the one hand, modern humans attempt to reach other planets and conquer space, driven by an unconscious and in a sense mystical desire to transcend their earthly condition, albeit only through physical means. On the other hand, those who perceive the inner limitations of the universe as conceived by modern science are often struck by this vision, but then seek to escape the tyranny of the physically limited world through drugs they believe can open the doors of perception to another reality. Both those who seek to conquer space and those who attempt to escape physical sensation through drug-induced experiences demonstrate, precisely through these efforts, that the need for spiritual experience and for the mystical quest is permanent. Man needs the infinite and the absolute in order to remain human. His limited psyche can remain healthy and whole only as long as it seeks that beloved whose union constitutes the supreme goal of all mystical poetry. The failure of modern substitutes. The failure of such attempts, whether space travel or drug-induced trips, a failure intuitively perceived by most people who recognize that such experiences are only poor substitutes for the peace and fullness that accompany authentic contact with the spirit, proves in itself that only true mysticism grounded in God through one of the revealed religions can make the mystical quest fruitful. Only a path that comes from God can lead to Him. And only such a path can guarantee the final beatitude of the soul, its union with the One. Only traditional authority can protect the soul from the great dangers that threaten those who attempt to climb mountains without a guide and without following an established path. The purpose of the true way, of authentic mysticism, is the absorption of the soul into its divine prototype. The purpose of the other, of pseudo-mysticism so widespread today, is the dissolution and decomposition of the very substance of the soul. The human soul was created by God, and only He has the right to reshape it. He Himself instilled in man the impulse toward the mystical life and the desire for that perfection found at the end of the path. And He also provided the authentic means to achieve that end. It is up to man to choose the path that will lead him from the state of Asphalas Saphalan up to the state of Asani Takwim, the path that will allow him to become truly himself. Sufism, the path back to unity. Sufism is a path established by God at the heart of Islam with the purpose of offering the possibility of spiritual fulfillment to the millions of people who, throughout the centuries, have followed and continue to follow the religion of the Quran. In its essence, Sufism is linked to the paths of spiritual realization present in other authentic traditions, but in its form, it shares the genius and characteristics of Islam. Sufism is the path that, within Islam, leads from the particular to the universal, from multiplicity to unity, from form to the superformal essence. Its function is to place man in a position to attain divine unity, al-Tawhid, the truth that has always been and always will be. It is the custodian of the eternal mysteries, Asrar al-Alast, that go back to the primordial covenant established between God and man before the creation of the world. Its message is therefore perennial, because it refers to the deep nature of man, situated beyond the layers of obscuration that time and the progressive distancing from his original perfection in the state of Asani Takwim have accumulated upon the primordial theomorphic core, the very center of the human being. Sufism expounds a truth that is both perennial and universal in its doctrines. In its methods it employs techniques in accordance with the nature of modern man, a nature essentially identical to that of primordial man, although in its external manifestations he has become increasingly impervious to spiritual influences and has seen his contemplative faculties weaken and atrophy. The memory of true identity. The essential function of Sufism is to remind man who he truly is, that is, to awaken him from the dream he calls ordinary life and to free his soul from the limits of the illusory prison of the ego, whose objective counterpart is what, in religious language, is called the world. By appealing to the true nature of man, Sufism satisfies his real and deep needs, not those he imagines he has on the basis of impressions and forms continually received from the external world in which he is immersed. Man seeks to satisfy his psychic and spiritual needs outside himself precisely because he is ignorant of who he is. Sufism reminds him that he must look within himself for what he seeks, that he must detach himself from the outer world and sink his roots into the divine nature that dwells at the center of his heart. Sufism removes man from the inferior condition of asfala saflan in order to restore him to his primordial perfection. There he finds within himself everything he had sought outside, because, being united with God, he is no longer separated from anything. As Hafiz says, "For many years our hearts sought the cup of Jamshid outside ourselves, and asked the stranger, as if as a favor, for that which it already possessed." The sacrifice of the self. To discover within oneself the cup of Jamshid, it is necessary to sacrifice the carnal self that hides from man the spirit dwelling within him. As Abu Yazid al-Bastami said, "3 times I renounced the world and went alone to him who is one. I presented myself before his presence and exclaimed, Lord God, I desire nothing but you. If I possess you, I possess everything." When God recognized my sincerity, the first grace he granted me was to remove the weeds of the ego from before me. The 3 fundamental elements of Sufism. Sufism essentially deals with 3 realities: the nature of God, the nature of man, the spiritual virtues that make the realization of God possible and allow man to return to the exalted state of asani takwim. Only through these virtues can man become the total theophany of the divine names and qualities. These are the eternal elements of Sufism, as well as of every authentic mystical path. Its end is God. Its starting point is man in his earthly condition. Its path is that which unites man with God. The path includes both the method that develops the spiritual virtues of the human soul and the doctrine that describes the universe through which the seeker must pass to reach the divine presence and attain true immortality. As Khwaja Abdullah Ansari states, the heart asked the soul, "What is the beginning of all this? What is its purpose? What is its fruit?" The soul replied, "Its beginning is the annihilation of the self. Its purpose is fidelity. Its fruit is immortality. To die before dying." In the mystical path of Sufism, man dies to his carnal nature in order to be reborn in God and reunite with the truth. Will the seeker of God be satisfied after having come this far? No, he needs nothing less than union. He dies before he dies, in order to live in his Lord, for after this death the ultimate migration begins that he calls himself to account before being called, and for that reason he is among those most fit to act in accordance with the truth. See the essence of truth before your own, and then after it, wherever it turns. Only God existed, and nothing existed besides him. Now it is as it was, in the end as in the beginning. 1 In his essence, with nothing outside of itself. Hidden inwardly, outwardly manifest. Without beginning, without end. What you see is his being. Absolute unity, it has no, but, nor, except. How could the divine essence be hidden by a veil? There is no veil but his own light. Sheikh al-Alawi. The fundamental doctrines of Sufism. What Sufism teaches about the divine nature, the universe, and man, that is, almost all of its doctrinal content, cannot be analyzed here in detail. It is sufficient to say that Sufi teachings revolve around 2 fundamental doctrines. The transcendent unity of being, Wadat al-Wujud. The universal or perfect man, al-Insan al-Kamil. All things are theophanies of the divine names and qualities, and receive their existence from that unique being who alone truly is. Man is the only creature in this world situated in a central and axial position, so that he can fully and consciously reflect the divine names and qualities. Becoming a saint in Islam means realizing all the possibilities contained in the human state. It means becoming the universal man. The mystical quest is nothing other than the realization of this state, which is also union with God, for the universal man is the mirror in which all the divine names and qualities are reflected. Through universal man, God contemplates his own essence and all that he has brought into existence. A timeless message. The message of Sufism is timeless precisely because it refers to truths that determine what could be called the pretemporal existence of man in relation to God, truths grounded in immutable and perennial aspects of reality, both transcendent and immanent to human nature. This doctrinal message is accompanied by a method derived, like the doctrine itself, from the Quran and the prophetic hadith. This method is effective only through spiritual grace, barakah, which is obtained through initiation and transmitted from master to disciple, going back to the Prophet himself. Understanding Sufi doctrine requires intellectual intuition, doc, which in itself is a divine gift. But accepting to follow the path, understanding its necessity, submitting to the discipline of a teacher, and fulfilling the obligations of the Sharia, the divine law, foundation of all authentic Sufi practice, require another gift from God, faith, iman. As has been said, the excellence of faith consists in remaining faithful to the supernaturally natural receptivity of primordial man. It means continuing to be as God created us and remaining open to his heavenly message, which may contradict earthly experience even though it is undeniable according to both subjective and objective criteria. If man possesses this faith and is willing to submit to the necessary spiritual discipline under the guidance of an authentic master, then he is reborn into the spiritual world with its infinite horizons and is freed from the captivity of contingency and finitude inherent in the earthly world. The liberation of man. Founded on the sacred forms of Islam, Sufism allows man to transcend the finite and reach the infinite precisely through those same forms. Thanks to the barakah present in its methods, it makes possible the liberation of man from the outer shell, thereby revealing his divine center, which, according to the language of the hadith, is the throne of the merciful, Arsh al-Rahman, and rendering the cosmos and all it contains transparent, so that the infinite content manifests through finite form. In this way, Sufism achieves the goal of the mystical quest, a quest that, as already stated, is perennial because it is rooted in the very depths of human existence. Since the dawn of humanity, this quest has continued and must continue. Otherwise, the world itself would cease to exist, having lost all valid reason for its persistence. Let us quote Hafiz again. As long as the name and sign of the tavern endure, and as long as wine exists, our heads will be dust on the path of the wise magician. The ring of the wise magician has been in my ear since before eternity. We are still what we were, and thus we shall be in the future. Sufism in the modern world. Equipped with a universal doctrine, a universal method, and a living tradition that guarantees the effectiveness of its practices, Sufism can be practiced under any circumstances, in both traditional and modern worlds. This remains true even though the manifestations of the modern world often appear to deny divine reality and lead man to forget who he is and where he is going. Since it is founded on the social and legal teachings of Islam, Sufism is designed to be practiced within society and not in a monastic environment separated from the social order. In fact, it integrates into daily life those aspects that in other traditions belong to monastic existence. The Sufi carries within himself spiritual poverty, faqr, even when living amidst worldly riches. For this reason, Sufism has often been called Mohammedan poverty, al-Faqr al-Mohammadi. For the Sufi, the world is dead, therefore he can live in it without being seduced by it. Sufism can integrate man into his divine center wherever he lives, provided he is willing to surrender himself completely to the path, which, being sacred, demands all that man is. Likewise, Sufism constitutes a path of integration between active life and contemplative life. It allows man to remain inwardly receptive to heavenly influences and to live an intense inner life, while outwardly continuing to act in a world that he shapes according to his spiritual nature, instead of being shaped by it, as happens to the profane man. Men lacking spiritual principles believe they shape the world and create their own age. In reality, it is time that shapes them. Only the spiritual man truly shapes his time and transforms his environment according to the principles that govern his inner self. The inner dimension of Islam. Thanks to this possibility of internalization, Sufism gives Islam a dimension of depth in which external forms become channels of inner illumination. Through this, the exoteric forms of Islam acquire a universality that can only come from the informal and the superformal. Likewise, Sufism regenerates from within the moral teachings of religion and, at the same time, provides those metaphysical and cosmological doctrines that alone are capable of responding to the need, present in certain believers, to return to the causal principle and to understand the futility of seeking fulfillment outside tradition. The comparative study of religions. Sufism also renders a great service to Islam by clarifying the problem of the comparative study of religions. As modernism has spread, this issue has become increasingly important for some Muslims and will certainly become even more so in the future. Religions can be studied historically as phenomena, theologically as dogmatic systems, or tolerated for humanitarian reasons. But all of this is insufficient. To tolerate another religion means to consider it false while still accepting its existence, just as pain is tolerated as something inevitable, even though one would prefer that it not exist. Understanding an orthodox religion in its depth is something entirely different. It is not simply a matter of analyzing its historical manifestations or theological formulations and then tolerating it. Rather, it consists in grasping, at least through intellectual anticipation, the inner truths from which the external forms of a tradition arise. It means moving from the phenomena of a religion to its noumena, from forms to essences, where the truth of all religions resides and where alone a religion can be truly understood. Since Sufism is, by its very nature, the message of essence within form, or of center within periphery, it can guide man from phenomena to noumena, from form, shackle, toward meaning, mana, to use the technical terminology of the Sufis. This, combined with the universal character of Islam, reflected in the Quranic insistence on acknowledging the truth of previous revelations, has made Sufis throughout history the great defenders of the transcendent unity of religions. They were the ones who explicitly formulated its principles. Some masters, such as Ibn Arabi and Maulana Jalal al-Din Rumi, even went so far as to apply this vision to specific teachings belonging to non-Islamic religions. Sufism thus provides an indispensable metaphysical instrument for carrying out an authentic comparative study of religions, allowing one to affirm the validity of each orthodox tradition while perceiving, beyond their differences, the transcendent unity that underlies them. This constitutes one of the great treasures that Islam can contribute to the contemporary dialogue with other traditions of the world. It can also offer invaluable principles to Western scholars who today are seeking a meaningful method of religious comparison capable of doing justice to the very nature of the religious phenomenon. Sufism and the West. There are also other areas in which Sufism could play a practical and fruitful role for the West, even among those who cannot follow the path itself. Since it constitutes a living example of the mystical path in its fullness, it contains universal teachings that could contribute to the recovery of forgotten elements of Christian contemplative life. And it is precisely these elements that are capable of restoring vitality to the metaphysical doctrines, mysticism, and spiritual methods of Christianity, whose urgent need is increasingly felt today. Unfortunately, most Western scholars who have studied Sufism have attempted to explain it exclusively through historical influence, as if the aspiration of the human soul toward God could ever be the product of historical circumstances. However, thanks to some recent works written with authenticity and understanding, those who feel a serious interest in this path are increasingly beginning to realize the help that Sufism can offer them in moving toward the center, through the web of illusions and confusions that the modern world has woven around the minds and souls of so many people. Precisely because it tends toward the perennial and the universal, the value of Sufism is as great today as it has ever been. It speaks to both Muslims and non-Muslims, as long as there is an ear capable of listening and an eye capable of seeing. The problems of modern man. If Sufism can answer the eternal questions that man asks about his true nature, his place in the world, and the mysteries of existence before birth and after death, what can it say about the urgent problems of modern man? The answer is simple: if the truths taught by Sufism, and by all authentic metaphysical doctrine, had not been forgotten by the modern world, these problems would not even exist. Problems are always the consequence of a particular form of ignorance. Modern man seeks to eliminate the transcendent dimension of his life while at the same time refusing to suffocate within the two-dimensional world he has created. He wishes to kill all gods and remain human. But this is a contradiction and an impossibility. As already noted, man can only remain human by remaining faithful to his theomorphic nature. The problems that arise from forgetting the transcendent dimension are the result of confining human existence within the cage of the material world and reducing the horizon to an exclusively physical dimension, even if it extends to galaxies millions of light years away. Sufism responds to such problems by recalling a fundamental truth. Man was created for immortality, and his intelligence was made to know the absolute. Therefore, no purely mortal life, however seemingly perfect, can fully satisfy his soul. The persistence of the mystical quest. Similarly, no amount of information, however vast, can replace the absolute that human intelligence seeks by its very nature. Nor do the modern human sciences, as they are usually taught, truly help man discover who he is. Sufism would add that the current tendency of many young people to seek visions through drugs, occult practices, or pseudo-mysticism constitutes an indirect confirmation of the Sufi understanding of human nature. The positivists of the 19th century never imagined that, in the most advanced societies of the 20th century, there would arise a growing fascination with everything from yoga to alchemy. Sufism as a criterion of discernment. The authentic doctrines and methods of Sufism can serve as a criterion for judging what is commonly considered in the modern world to be a method of spiritual realization, at least for those who possess discernment. Likewise, they can guide in a healthy and meaningful way the impulse toward the mystical quest in those who are willing to accept its discipline or apply its teachings to their lives. In both cases, Sufism represents a grace from heaven and a sign of divine mercy, rahmah, even for non-Muslims, many of whom are engaged in a desperate search that is often directed toward illusory goals. In such circumstances, Sufism can act as a net that prevents falling into the bottomless abyss of the lower waters. A sign of divine mercy. The presence of Sufism in the world is therefore a sign both of the perennial nature of the mystical quest and of the incessant outpouring of divine mercy. Sufism recalls the imperishable covenant established between God and man, a covenant by virtue of which the human being continues to seek the divine while remaining truly human. He who remembers that pact in his true identity remains faithful to his nature and, for that very reason, continues the search for God, who is already present at the very center of his being. Final poem of Hafiz. Your image will never leave the tablet of my heart and soul, that swaying cypress will never be erased from my memory. The thought of your lips will not leave the mind of this ecstatic man that I am, whatever the oppression of heaven or the affliction of time. My heart was bound, from pre-eternity, to the curl of your hair. Even after eternity it will not rebel against it, it will never break the pact. Whatever weighs on my heart, except the burden of your pain, may leave me, but your pain will never leave my heart. Your love was planted in my heart and soul in such a way that, even if my head were to disappear, your love would still remain within them. Hafiz. Conclusion. Precisely because it transmits the message of the eternal to that which in man is permanent and immutable, Sufism, like all authentically spiritual paths, is perennial and inscribed in the innermost structure of the human soul. Men pass away, but Sufism remains, immutable and transcendent like the celestial vault. It continues to remind humanity of the immortality and beatitude to which it is destined from the beginning, and which can be attained only through divine grace and spiritual effort.